This budget hearing is conducted by the Committee on Appropriations and Adjudication. Will now come back to order. We now have before us to hear the Department of Corrections. I want to preface this budget hearing and future hearings with the fact that the government of Guam has an impending FY 2015 cumulative general fund deficit of about $120 million. Now more than ever, we all have to understand that increasing expenditures against potential decline or flat revenue levels may not be realistic. We may all have to come to that realization either now or sometime in the near future. With that, congratulations, Mr. Director, on your new position. And you now have the floor, Senator, to give you a presentation on behalf of the Department.
Thank you, Vice Speaker, members of the committee. My name is Tony Lamarina, the Acting Director for the Department of Corrections. To my right is my Deputy Director, Carlene G. Borja. To my left is Ovita A. Nauta, our ASO. I'd also like to introduce our Warden, Alan Borja, our clinical psychologist, Dr. Patricia Taiminglo, our assistant facility superintendent, Captain Anton Uggan. We also have Jeffrey Limo, our corrections supervisor. We have Therese Tayama, our corrections social work administrator, and Xenia Pacina from the Guam Memorial Hospital. And we brought the staff just in case you had any in-depth questions that you want to ask. As you all know, I took the helm of the Department of Corrections last Monday. And so the men and women of the Department of Corrections that I brought today can answer a lot of the questions that I may not have the answers to. I beg your indulgence. I will not come out publicly and say that I know everything and everything about the Department of Corrections. It's a learning process, and these professionals behind me and next to me, we will work as a team to better the organization. This year, our requested amount for the Department of Corrections is $28,332,209, which is a 9% increase from last year. Our current staffing pattern is 210 FTEs. In 2017, we're projected to be at 274 FTEs, which is a 23% increase from this year. We have actually just concluded interviews for 43 corrections officers. We will now be in the process of making the selection, going through the polygraph testing and the psychological testing, and then from there go into training. So we should have these officers online probably in about 4 months. Currently, obviously, a lot of the questions asked of any public safety agency is overtime. And overtime at the Department of Corrections, as you all are aware, is far and above what has been budgeted. We run a 24 operation, and under those circumstances, you're always going to have overtime. We also had a manpower shortage, but I think with the 43 officers, we put a team together, and we're doing studies now on various aspects on how to curb overtime. Also scheduling. We're looking at alternative scheduling methods so that we can, one, relieve the stress of our current officers. Our current officers work 5-day shifts, 12-hour shifts. And so what we're trying to do now is work a schedule where they can possibly work 3 days on, 3 days off type situations. And then also maintain and cutting back on overtime tremendously. So our goal is to stay within the budget of our overtime as budgeted in the 2007, which is about $1,020,000. And if we can accomplish that, I think that's great strides at this point in time. In regards to other increases in the budget, it's pretty much standard increases, increments, and so forth, utilities. But the primary focus right here is getting enough corrections officers to, one, cut back on overtime and relieve undue stress on the current staff. So if you have any questions, I'm open to your questions.
Is that the complete presentation by yourself and your deputy? We did send a letter stating that for this hearing we wanted a complete narrative on the discussion of your budget. No?
My apologies, I didn't see that memo, Vice Speaker.
Sent it out on the 22nd.
Okay.
Please be prepared to discuss the DOC's continuing budgetary needs for FY 2017 to include a detailed narrative presentation and/or justification for all budgetary requests for 2017 that are above the 2016 appropriation level of $26,468 to DOC. Please ensure that such narrative presentation and/or justification includes details such as requested increases by division and object category. Number 2, any budgetary reserve being held on any and all of FY 2016 DOC appropriations by funds as of date of the hearing. And
yeah, I apologize, Vice Speaker. I did not see this. I may have gotten lost in me just starting a week ago and all the other responsibilities with operations. So I apologize for that. But I can provide all that information to you. If you have any additional questions that you may want to ask at this point, would be free to answer that.
we provided the Department of Corrections, or the Department of Corrections was allocated $1,036,252 to recruit employees for correction officers in FY 2016. Can you provide this committee with information on how many additional employees have been recruited and employed utilizing this cost account?
Currently, we have, again, as I stated earlier, we just concluded interviews for 43 new positions for Corrections Officer 1.
This is the end of June.
Right. And
we're 3 months into the fiscal, till the end of the fiscal year. How many have been recruited in the fiscal year already, or are we at zero?
My understanding is we have recruited 16. And again, Vice Speaker, I just came on board, and that's no excuse, and that's why I'm looking into it. It's quite obvious there were problems in the recruitment process, and maybe my deputy can answer also on our behalf. But we are working very closely now with DOA, and in the last 2 weeks we've been recruiting or interviewing numerous
in the last 9
applicants.
months, what has the 1.036 been used for?
For the recruitment process, Vice Speaker, we had sent the GG1s,
How many?
16 under the general fund and 24 under the Department of Interior Compact Impact Funds. And I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sir. And so we waited.
When was that sent, more importantly?
We had initially sent them down at the beginning of the fiscal year, and we had been waiting for between BBMR and DOA to vet through their process. We just received the listing of eligibles 2 weeks ago, and we just completed the 43 interviews for the 43 openings we have for Corrections Officer 1.
So your testimony today is that at the beginning of the fiscal year, last October, the Departments of Corrections sent downtown to BBMR and DOA 40 GG1s for processing, or at least initial processing.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And sometime in June, 9 months later, we finally receive word back from them that it's been processed.
Yes, sir. They went through the testing process. I can't testify as to how long and what was the delay down at DOA, but they did the written test, the physical test. They did the vetting through those testing processes, and then they provided ample time for appeals, for ratings, and then when that was all completed, they provided us a list of 47 potential applicants for 43 now openings. We had 3 additional openings within that time frame.
So what's the process now between today and the end of this fiscal year to try to implement the hiring of these individuals?
We're going through the selection process now. We've got the ratings from the interview committee. We'll be meeting with them, rate them, and then make notification, and then begin the process of doing the polygraph tests, the psychological tests, and then into training. So we're looking probably around 4 months before these officers can actually be on the workplace.
But that's only for the processing.
Right.
How long is the education and training segment?
In 4 months, they will be on board.
They'll be
as
on board in
full
4
officers.
months, inclusive of the selection and the training.
It'll take about a month, Vice Speaker, to go through the process, the background check and everything, and then the cycle will start in approximately a month. It takes about another 3 months to get them through the training cycle. They'll be on board in approximately 4 months.
How many officers are you short?
You know, again,
What would be the... I realize you've only been there a week, but
Right.
somebody has got to have an answer on what is the optimum officer level for DOC to run at a competent level.
I think at if we base it on national standards and making sure all posts are secured, I think we're looking at about 270.
Just for a just based on our executive order, we're looking at to run a 12-hour shift on a daily basis. We're looking at 50 at the least on the 12-hour shift, 50 on board. Right now, we are currently running with 43 assigned to a shift, not taking into account the regular days off. So on schedule, on a regular shift, on a 12-hour shift, would be 29, roughly 25 to 29 officers on board on a regular shift. So to efficiently run a shift adequately, covering all posts, we're looking at 50 just for a normal daily operation.
So translate
Total.
that into English for me and tell
I
me
would say-
how many new officers you need on board so that we could...
186, sir.
And where are we at right now?
We're looking at 130 right now, running both ACF and a Gutnia.
And how much are you running in overtime?
Approximately on a 12-hour shift, the average overtime rate is 40 hours per pay period. We bring in per officer. When we bring in the 43 on board, we now have several options to look at on implementing different rosters, and that would drastically reduce overtime by we're looking at maybe 5 hours per officer per week, per pay period.
And translate that again into money for me. How much is your overtime? And if we could get you and Department of Administration to work together to process these things in a timely fashion, how much could we be saving if we could have moved this process, hiring process, back to January? Last January, not this upcoming January.
Again, Vice Speaker, what we're doing is we're taking consideration that we're working with the committees to evaluate by bringing these 43 officers on board, instituting a new scheduling pattern. Our goal, again, like I said initially, was one, to cut back on overtime, and secondly, to relieve the undue stress on our officers. What we're looking at is possibly even trying to reduce our overtime to our budgeted amount, which our budget amount for 2017 is $1,020,000. So our goal at this point in time with the new scheduling plan that we're currently working on is to stay within budget of $1,020,000 for overtime, and then coming up with that schedule so that we can also, currently we have a lot of officers who are working 5-day, 12-hour shifts, and these officers are tired. They need rest. So we're looking at various alternatives where we work 3 days on, 3 days off type scenarios. So once we sit down and we actually lay this plan down and see if it's workable, we'll implement that. But we look at anticipating probably reducing overtime substantially, Warden, about 50%.
Yes, I think more than that.
I mean, I understand, and my heart really goes out to the officers and their families, because I was listening on the radio. I'm not sure if it was Dr. Pat or some other. There was a doctor talking about the fact that the health of these officers is in jeopardy.
Right.
This legislature gave you $1 million to address the hiring of new employees, so that we could we could reduce that time. We are 9 months into the fiscal year and nobody's on.
And Senator, I share your concern. When I came on board too last week, to find out that 9 months has lapsed into the fiscal year and only now we're doing interviews. But there is a process in the government of Guam. The GG1s were cut. And, we just had to wait for that process to happen, go through the vetting process, and get the qualified candidates to be interviewed. Once we got the candidates, the list of candidates, we immediately implemented the committee. And I was even in part of the process, so we can try to expedite it as quickly as possible. So, we're trying to move I understand your concern, and I feel for all the officers, but, moving forward, we're going to try to expedite the process as quickly as we can.
No offense, but I know that when you want to move 106 GG1s over the weekend, even if it is Christmas weekend, it happens. Why couldn't we move these GG1s as quickly through and process them? It's not as if we didn't provide you the money in the vacancy pool. It's allocated $1 million. And it's not being utilized. Instead, we're running up overtime.
Right.
You say you want to live within the 940 that we gave you. Where are we today? What's the total overtime?
Overtime, Senator, Vice Speaker, at this time, I think we're tracking almost $3 million by the end of the fiscal year.
We budgeted how much?
$940,000.
And you're... Repeat that again. So
we're tracking...
everybody, all my colleagues hear it.
Right.
And the press hears it.
Sure.
And hopefully Adelup hears it. Their inability to move 40 GG1s has meant that this legislature's allocation of $900,000 for overtime is being completely overshadowed by currently running at $3 million. Please,
it's close to my understanding, close to $3 million, possibly by the end of the fiscal year. Again, Senator, Vice Speaker, again, moving forward, I understand. I mean, when I came on board a week ago, I saw the issues, and we're trying to expedite now. I'm trying to work with the various government agencies and try to expedite the process as quickly as we can. Moving forward, and I can't go back into the past in regards to expediting the process, but moving forward, we're going to move as quickly as we can. I've already met with BBMR and to see what we can do to expedite the process so that we can get these officers on board and start implementing this new schedule to cut down on overtime and relieve the stress on our officers that currently work.
I know and so where's this additional $2.1 million coming from? What area of DOC is going to suffer because we have to spend it in overtime?
Well, it's the shortfalls are coming from salaries, and then we're also taking it, and then the from the DOC revolving fund, which we bill the federal government for detaining their detainees and so forth. So that's where funding is coming from.
The general fund operations up at DOC, not the federal, is what operations the general fund funds is going to be impeded by this $3 million overtime?
Well, what we're hoping is that again, I'm looking at the budget and I'm still analyzing it. We're hoping that we'll zero out. And you're probably saying, well, how are you going to zero out? And primarily what we're looking at is currently shortfalls in overtime are covered by salaries. Okay, and then shortfalls in salaries will come out from our 15% reserve. And then we're also going to be looking at tapping the DOC revolving fund, which is charges that we charge the federal government for their detainees. So hopefully, as we move money around, we're able to meet the demands of overtime. And so far, it's tracking to look, it looks positive at this point in time.
How much is being withheld of your budget?
15%. What does that amount come to? About $2 million. About $2 million.
And that's currently still being held.
Well, yes, and so that's what we're going to be tapping on to cover those shortfalls.
How many pay periods behind are we with overtime?
We are current at this point.
What should be the FY17 overtime request?
Again, Vice Speaker, with the new officers coming on board, like I said, I'm working with the warden and his crew. With the 43 new officers coming on board, once put in place, we're able to work out a new scheduling alternative, and we're very confident that we can stay within the $1,020,000 budget in the 2017 request.
Is there any reason why between last October and today we've only, though it's taken this long for DOA and BBMR to process, why we didn't send down an additional 40 GG1s? I'm trying to figure out whether or not we all have problems juggling more than one ball, because it seems we just had GPD. We can only run one training cycle at a time, and we're not going to start the next one until after it ends. Can we have 3 training cycles running simultaneously, but ending on different dates, or is that impossible?
Well, I think the GG1s were sent down based on staff's information. It's just, again, the matter of processing. I don't know what the reasons were in regards to what took so long for us to get qualified applicants to be interviewed.
And so how many qualified applicants were sent?
We interviewed 47 for 43 positions.
How many did DOA clear?
80, but we were only sent down 47 names.
Why don't you get all 80 of them and interview them, or send down GG1 for the next 40 so that you have 80 and you start 40 now and you start 40 in August.
Yeah, and I did request that. I share your frustration, Vice Speaker, but I did request that. But again, we did interview these 47 individuals, and we hope to bring them on so we can begin training as soon as possible.
Will they be valid for the next 40, or are we going to have to start from ground zero?
They'll be valid. They'll still be good.
So can we get the clearance on the additional 40, and
I will make that call again today and see if we can get those additional 40 individuals so we can interview. But we're moving forward. Of the 47 that we interviewed, we're moving forward. And I believe on Tuesday, the committees and I are getting together, and we're going to make our selections and then begin the process of the psychological testing and also the lie detector polygraph test. And then from there, make our selection, move forward, and begin the training process. Now, if we don't select all 40, then we'll add requests we'll get the remaining 40, conduct interviews as quickly as possible, and move forward. And again, as you said, if it requires 2 training cycles, we'll do 2 training cycles.
Okay. In your budget digest, there is mention of a $5.3 million DOI 1A 100% federal grant funding continuing appropriation.
Right.
Is that carrying over into the next fiscal year, or was that just a one fiscal year?
It's been carried over, but a lot of that has already been encumbered. 3.3 million of that is used for our infirmary. And then the remaining balance is going to be used for corrections officers.
As long as you've mentioned the infirmary and the good representatives from the hospital here,
right.
I want to congratulate and thank Guam Memorial Hospital for its assistance in trying to get you
right.
to satisfy the federal suit.
And
what
Judge,
is the current status of that agreement?
Well, we walked through. We had a walkthrough with Judge Tadinko Gatewood. She was very impressed with the process that is, or the developments at the infirmary. Our MOU with GMH is in place. We have Miss Piscina here today. If you have any questions concerning that, she can go more in depth in that. But things are looking good. As a matter of fact, Judge Tadinko Gatewood, during her site visit, said our infirmary actually smelled like a clinic or a hospital. So we saw and there are many individuals that played a major part in that, not just necessarily GMH, but many officers and clients within DOC who actually renovated the current office space or clinic space, and they did a fantastic job. So it was all hands on deck to get that in place. I wasn't there. I know Carla and the warden and everyone here today played a major role, and I was just amazed when I did the walkthrough with the judge and on what work has been done in such a short period of time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Speaker and Mr. Chairman. First of all, before I venture into the numbers and the overall operations, I just want to thank your department officers, your corrections officers for the support of the FESPAC operation. Very similar to the Guam Police Department, your personnel really stepped up and supported that at the get-go. Initially, you started off with supporting it, and I believe that your agency was the one that stepped up to bat first time around, and also assisted in closing that particular operation. So thank you very much to your men and women in uniform and all of your personnel. Now going into the numbers, Mr. Warden, you mentioned that you have approximately 130 officers, uniform officers today?
No, sir. We have 186. The 130 is actually the ones that are
on shift.
On shift. The rest are like support sections, transport section, visitation section.
And ideally, you said you would need on shift
On shift, 50 officers, sir.
50 officers, so you would acquire the 43. Now, the only reason why I'm asking this is because, Mr. Director, last year you accumulated an expense of about $2.3 million in overtime. And I think that should have been a major red flag in terms of trying to address the scheduling sequence of all of the officers, and if in fact there's a shortfall. Mr. Warden, congratulations on your new assignment.
Thanks,
But
sir.
you assume that responsibility, and it certainly speaks about taking care of your personnel at the get-go. When many of your personnel are accumulating overtime in the amount of $2.3 million, and there's an opportunity to be able to recruit as aggressively as the chairman has alluded to, I think that additional effort really has to be placed in regards to pushing that, because $2.3 million last fiscal year, which ended on September 30th last year, and we're projecting approximately $3 million for this fiscal year. I think it tells me that not enough has been done in terms of trying to curtail some of the overtime costs.
Senator, I'm not making excuses
No,
for
no,
what
no.
happened
What's
in the
done
past.
is done. Mr.
Right.
Director,
So,
what's done
moving
is done.
forward is-
Last year's 2.3, this year is $3 million. So in other words, we're $700,000 above last year's expense sequence. So that should have been a major red flag, like the chairman had alluded to, about making sure that we push these papers so that in fact we get these officers in, properly trained. And that's a statement that I'm making in terms of being able to provide the warden with the personnel that he needs to put out on shift, because I can anticipate or understand many of the challenges that some of your officers are enduring right now because they have to work overtime. They appreciate the additional compensation, but also in the same token, they really do not have that personal time to themselves to be able to regenerate themselves and also spend quality time with family. On the part of the overtime, thank you for being current. To the department, thank you for being current. I know that it was a forced hand to some extent, and it never should have come to that particular point, but to know that our officers now, corrections officers, are receiving their payment upon accruing these obligations, I think it's good to know that at least in this agency, regardless as to whether in fact it's an external entity trying to oversee and address this, I think it's good to know that our officers, once they accrue overtime, they will be paid accordingly within a reasonable time frame, and that's within their pay period.
Just to let you know, too, Senator, I met with the U.S. Department of Labor, and so we will be working with them. Actually, they're going to be a part of our working group in formulating new work schedules to make sure that we comply with their standards and to ensure that overtime is kept to a minimum with the resources that we're provided.
Well, with the recruitment of 40 additional or 43 additional corrections officers, with the public statement that you have made in terms of reducing the overall anticipated overtime to a level of $1 million, I know the warden alluded to possibly reducing by 50%. So even 50% is $1.5 million. That's much better than the 2.3 that was accumulated fiscal year 15.
That's our goal.
$3 million this fiscal year. So let me ask in terms of numbers, how many corrections officers have you lost to either retirement, transfers, or who have just left the department?
Since I've been tracking FY15 to present, we lost 31 officers.
So since October 1st of
FY15.
this fiscal year, you've lost 31 officers.
FY15.
Also, the beginning of the entire FY15.
Yes. Although we ran several cycles to our facility, we acquired 54 new officers, but however we lost 31 in the process. So actually we gained 22.
Right.
In actuality, when the smoke cleared, 22.
Okay, so you're getting closer to your ideal number of 186.
We actually have
On
186 or more. That's counting myself and parole officers.
No, but you alluded to 186 on shift. That
Yes.
would be an ideal number for you outside of your management.
50 on a shift, sir.
Or 50 on a shift.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So you
On one shift.
were able to recruit 54 within the last 2 years.
Yes,
You
sir.
are recruiting 43 who should be on shift within 4 months. So you're nearing the ideal number in terms of exactly
But
what you're
in the
calling.
same process center, we lost 31
Yes.
within all that. So
Yeah. That's incorporated into the sequence, but
22
you're looking at 50 per shift. Now, the stipulated order The chairman had asked a question with regards to the $5 million, and 3.3 has already been committed to the infirmary. The remaining balance is being utilized specifically for the recruitment of additional personnel. Any of those balances being used to recruit the 43?
Yeah.
Out of the DOI funds?
Yes. Part of the DOI funds was given for the 24 new officers.
So the 24 is out of the 43?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, inclusive of or within the 43 number?
Within the 43,
Okay.
24 is from the DOI.
So based on your budget requests, year over year, with the additional 43, your budgetary request should reflect all of your requirements for the additional 43 plus the anticipated overtime and your operational needs.
Right.
Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Stipulated order. Obviously, that's going to be a continuing expense.
Yes.
How is that incorporated into this fiscal year's budget?
Well, I'll let Carla.
Please, please.
We received we do have the carryover from the Department of Interior Fund, so we have the carryover money, and then we received an additional 1.1 million that was asked for in the general fund budget. And together that will continue to allow us to fund the clinic and all operations needed to meet the stipulated order going forward.
So that's within the fiscal year 17. So we should
Yes.
anticipate going into fiscal year 18, regardless as to who's going to be making that decision from this perspective, that there would be an adjusted increase request
Yes,
to
there will
address
be.
the ongoing stipulated order requirements.
Yes, that's correct, Senator.
Okay. Just on that note, I want to commend the department because, within a reasonable time frame, whether it's 5 months, 6 months, hopefully the U.S. District Court will be able to look at the entire process, the progress that has been realized. I mean, I know that the site visit was very helpful to the judge. She was able to see firsthand in terms of a lot of the effort and the ongoing work that has been incorporated into addressing some of her requirements, the court's requirements, and that hopefully within 6 months that stipulated order restrictions or requirements would be lifted. So I commend the department so far. We're not out of the woods yet, but then being mindful that in addition to it being lifted, those requirements continue to persist moving
Yes.
forward. So that's why I raised that question about what the possible additional cost would be going into fiscal year 18 in terms of addressing that requirement itself. Now, aside from that, one of the biggest challenges that you face is obviously upgrade and maintenance of facilities. Does this budget incorporate maintaining your existing facilities?
Yeah.
We do budget a portion for capital improvement, and if we need to make for our facility patchwork improvements to the facility. However, we have applied for and received a grant through the state clearinghouse I'm working with Ms. Baltazar on, which will allow us to assess all the buildings for refurbishment and renovation. So now we're looking at putting that together for the RFP at this point. So we have moved forward and we have received a grant. I believe it's, if I'm not mistaken, about $200,000. And so that will allow us to contract somebody out, but I can get, Senator, the exact amount from Ms. Baltazar. But it will allow us to hire someone to come in and take a look at all of our buildings and to see what we need to do to fix the buildings, if they're still, usable, how we should move forth, and that's part of the Blue Ribbon Commission. But we did receive grant money for that.
Okay. In the amount of?
I believe from Ms. Baltazar, I apologize, Senator, I believe it was about $200,000, but I can forward to the committee and to everyone the
Please, to the
exact
chairman.
amount. Yes,
Just
sir.
so the chairman's aware of it.
Yes, sir.
Now, just to close out, your prison population, can you differentiate between detainees and others?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, Senator, we have...
And these numbers are as current as,
They're current, sir.
okay,
On
as yesterday.
island, we have 754 incarcerates. We have 380 inmates,
Okay,
382 detainees, and we have 13 off island.
380 inmates, 382
Two
detainees, and
detainees.
13 off island.
Yes, 13. Total count is 775. On island, 754.
Total 775. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director, DOC team. Of the 186, you stated, Director, 136 is uniform personnel. And you stated as the dust settles, you find out, even through your recruitment, after the 50, you now have 30 that are still on board. Is that correct? 30?
30 on board?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, I don't know if I got that right, but out of your 50, there's 30, 20 that for one way.
We lost 31.
Okay.
Yes. From FY15 to present, we lost 31 officers.
Okay.
Senator.
When we're looking to recruit these 40, are we also anticipating through attrition? I'm not sure how many are anticipating to retire within the next 2 to 5 years, or even within the year. Do you have a gauge on that?
Roughly, just on common knowledge, I say maybe about 4 retiring.
4 retiring.
And then we have 2 that's going to be deployed just this year.
You're factoring, and that's on an average annual. Are you anticipating annually you're going to be losing about 4 to 5?
Not on retirement, sir. On various reasons, just like the 31 that we lost.
Right.
Those were based on various reasons.
Okay.
Retirement, transfer to another agency.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Last question, Mr. Chair. I toured the facility twice and I had a couple of questions, and I thank you for the team for taking me through the tour and seeing firsthand the challenges, hearing and seeing it firsthand. And we spoke earlier about it's great to know that there is some grant funding available to help with the facilities. But looking down the road, going forward, Director, as you stated, I don't know. I'm not an expert, but looking at the mass, the land mass that has to be covered there, and seeing how the facility was designed, and seeing how it's just spread out. When you look at that in the overall, even with the Blue Ribbon Committee, and when you look at that whole challenge, how does that all factor into cost? I'm trying to relate this to our whole budget process, even going forward. I know all this translates into cost because you got to cover more ground, more green space because of the way the facilities are designed. Are we looking forward of how? Yes, refurbishing is great right now, but forward, how do we structure this facility to cater to the needs of our time?
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. That's something that the Blue Ribbon Commission was initially looking at is the structuring, but we're looking, of course, at finances as to be more frugal as to how we're going to spend this money, should we have to build any additional buildings or rebuild what we have right now. And that's when we applied for the grant, so we can take a look at all the buildings and see what we need to do. If fixing it's just going to cost too much and it's just going to be patchwork, then we're not going to fix it, and we're going to try and move on. And so the Blue Ribbon Commission meets with all of the stakeholders to see what we can do. Should we, fix what we have? Should we rebuild and modernize the facility? But again, it all costs money. So the commission is still getting together, and right now, thankfully, we did win this grant. So we'll look forward to getting the RFP out. We're trying to get all the specs together and get that out and have someone come in from the outside and tell us what we should do with these buildings and where we should move forth. And then we'll get back together with our stakeholders and decide where we're going to go from there. But we are looking into that, and we don't want to be dumping money into something every year that's not ever going to get up to par. So we want to make sure that if it's a building that we really need to just tear down and move on, then the commission will get together and decide what they're going to do from there.
Right. Right off the back, I know, Warden, when we were touring the facility, again, some of the comments were made, of how, the personnel that goes into covering more ground, and because the way it's designed. And, I'm not even trying to bring up the idea of building a whole new facility, but, we have to look at plans and structuring this to where, even though it's costing us this much, but I know in the future there has to be something that has to be put in play and serious about it, because going there twice, and just seeing it and the information being provided to me clearly tells me there is a lot of cost factored into the way this facility is designed, and that has to be really, really clear to not only to the committee but to our people, so that there's buy-in by our community that that facility, unless you got to take the whole island on a tour there, but I went there twice and saw the way it's structured. It does factor into cost, and there's no doubt about that.
You know, Senator, again, like I said, I've been there a week and a half, and I've toured the facility, and I tell you, you're talking about an old building. And the men and women who work at the Department of Corrections should be commended. I mean, the place is impressive. For those of you who have not taken a tour of DOC recently, the place is clean.
Right.
It's immaculate. It's an old building, but there's only so much you can do. And our men and women are overworked because, as you had stated, we're dealing with various clusters now, so it requires more manpower. Unlike modern facilities, which one corrections officer can guard, 300 individuals because of all the electronic devices available to him. We're dealing with a corrections officer who can't even see when they unlock a locking device, and another officer has to be there. So these are the situations that we face. Granted, we understand the situations and the shortages of personnel, and we're going to try our best in the coming year to overcome these, but we also need the support in improving the facility. I noticed that everything we discussed today in the budget is specific to incarceration, but we also need to look at recidivism. How do we decrease reentry of criminals into the system? We have Dr. Tai Minglu and Therese Tayama, who are working on programs within the Department of Corrections to ensure that we try to assist our clients as much as possible to find other alternatives and skills and trades. And this is one of my main focuses at DOC, is to work with the various stakeholders in the community so that we can find and train them in various skills and certified in various skills. I'm going to be coming to the legislature to see what we can do to implement programs, incentives that incentivize employers in the community to hire skilled labor from the Department of Corrections. Because the reality is we can talk about this till we're blue in the face, but the reality is we need to begin to stop repeat offenders coming in. We need to provide them the resources so that we have less stress on our officers. So, we need to look at the overall component of corrections. It's not just incarceration. That's one portion of corrections, is incarceration. That's why we're called a correctional facility, is because we try to correct those clients within our walls. And so these are the things that, one of my main focuses is working with the community and with you as legislators to see what we can do so that when they're released, they become contributing members of our society and they have other alternatives offered to them rather than coming back into DOC. So that we don't have to constantly come here and say, we need 50 more officers, we need this, we need that. So, it's holistic, it's all encompassing. And so, as we talk here, we shouldn't just concentrate primarily on incarceration, but we should look at the total picture.
Thank you, Director. And Chairman, I thank you for allowing me to talk about this, because I know we're dealing with the budget, and we got to talk about the needs today and the obligations today, and but going forward and taking these two tours, I appreciate the efforts of the men and women at the corrections officer. I got a first-hand experience of that, but I want to put some. Again, we had some momentum with this discussion with the facility, but now that we're talking about it, even the maintenance costs, some of the grants and aids, I think there has to be. I believe the facility has done, even though there's a lot of efforts to take care of it at this point, and I thank you all for that. But there has to be some serious discussions about where we want to see that facility and how it's structured to deal with this time, and what's available to us today, and working models that can handle the type of situation in our community, or that models that worked in other jurisdictions similar to ours that we can work with. So, and as it connects to this process, this budget process, we can look 5-10 years from now, seeing to the availability of these plannings, how this could also impact the overall budget process going forward, and looking and how we can measure outcomes a lot more effectively.
And Senator, as the deputy said, once that assessment is done through that grant, we will be back to the legislature to report on our findings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Lamarana, for your most recent comments. And those are basically going to be my questions and my participation in this budget hearing is, what are some of the things that DOC will continue to do to address to provide a holistic approach to addressing the needs of the Department of Corrections, which certainly include the inmates and their families, and to include the work release programs, to include your continued collaboration with the judiciary, to implement things such as restorative justice to resolve just even problems among the inmate population, and how to restore the dignity to those individuals who made bad choices and as a result are committed to bettering themselves. And we see a lot of inmates who've transitioned in the community, and we never really get to talk about those success stories and to talk about how that's a direct correlation because of the staff of DOC, the correction officers, and I mean I think that's what the Vice Speaker was looking for in providing every department and agency an opportunity to give an opening statement to highlight your successes. And so I'm just trying to reset the tone of the budget hearing to reflect on those accomplishments, to talk about what I saw in the media with respect to how the Chief Judge and the Attorney General was very happy with the Department of Corrections and the stipulated order, and how you're working to comply with that order. And so I'll be looking forward to that written overview of what you've seen over the last week and a half, what your Deputy Director has seen since she was appointed to the Department of Corrections, and I understand it's triage. Mm-hmm. It's triage, but that's the beauty about government, right? And that's the reality of the challenges all of us face in each branch of government, where what do you do to meet the demands today, and what do you do to do things outside the box to cut costs, to think of more programs and more services that don't impact the community. There's been talk for so long about having the electric monitoring so that you won't have to incarcerate the inmates. There's been a lot of community discussion with respect to the deportation of foreign criminals. I mean, those are the kind of conversations we need to have, because the foreign criminal population alone, I believe at the time the Vice Speaker and I were looking into this, I believe it's about an $8 million a year impact to the Department of Corrections. And and there's a new law. When Senator McCready did his 2 strikes and you're out, there was an amendment in that law that required the Attorney General to give periodic updates on what the AG is doing to enforce the tenets of those foreign treaties, to require that these foreign criminals be deported upon conviction. And then there's also the issue of the detainees and how long they're being detained. And so your job is not just to lock them up and throw away the key. And that was my same experiences when I was at the Department of Youth Affairs, and how much I appreciate the Department of Corrections' support for the Department of Youth Affairs, even so much so that you have skilled workers, you have skilled carpenters, your inmates were the ones that basically refurbished the facility at the Mingilao compound. And if you take a look at some of the work release programs, and what I'm interested in doing, and I had several meetings with the Department of Labor to really pay these inmates the prevailing wage. It doesn't make sense in my mind that they're in a work release program, they're doing skilled worker type contributions, and I believe they're not being paid the prevailing wage, and they're being paid a wage that's been determined by the Department of Labor director. And so, I mean, those are the things I'm pursuing. And so when you structure something so that an inmate on a work release program is providing carpentry work, and if they're paid a prevailing wage, I believe you can structure it so that 1/3 goes to restitution, 1/3 of their wages goes to court fees or any government fines, and then 1/3 goes to the inmate so he can provide for his or her family. And I'm more than certain that that 1/3 that he's going to be earning, he or she will be earning, is much more than what they're earning right now on the current antiquated statute that we have before us. And so I'll work closely with yourself, with your deputy, with Department of Labor, and these construction companies are getting a huge bang for their buck to get this kind of service and not be paid prevailing wage. And they're not paid prevailing wage because our statutes don't set up that structure. So those are just some of the things that we can work on, and we are working on. My question with respect to the Blue Ribbon panel and the review of the current facilities, what are your plans for the detention facility in Hagatna?
That's all encompassing to everything that we have to do to look at and assess not just the Mingilao facility, but also the Agana facility as well. So we're just waiting for that professional to come in and take a look at everything from the outside rather than one of us going through and telling you what the problems are with the facility. We want the professional from the outside to come in and review and assess everything. And that will be encompassed into this grant assessment that we were awarded.
Because there's hearing there's a possibility that GPD might move out of where it's at. They're identified land and they're building a
That's
headquarters.
correct.
And so,
That's correct.
think about moving the detention facility out of Hagatna, because there's a current plan to revitalize Hagatna.
Right, the restoration.
And,
Yes, absolutely.
with what the governor plans to do and the Hagatna Redevelopment Authority needs to do to revitalize Hagatna. And so,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you, Mr. Chair. And when you do that overview, you need to highlight, how far the department has come, and despite the need for all this money that's being paid for overtime, there's, I'm sure, a lot of cost-saving measures that you've undertaken in order to meet those demands.
Yes, yes, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to the budget, and there's several things. But I want to really look at one thing. You're tracking $3 million in overtime. That's what was stated today. And of course, only $900,000 was really allotted or allocated for overtime. And then the statement was made that really to make up for the shortfall, you'll be pressing for the release of the 15% reserve. Is that kind of an accurate representation of what was said?
Yeah, I mean, and also from, we're looking at every avenue where there's surpluses within the budget, but, obviously the large pocket would be the 15% reserve.
Right. Can I just ask then, in previous fiscal years, maybe 14 and 15, was there also a 15% reserve that was set aside and taken out of the budget that was appropriated?
I was not at DOC, but, I've been with the administration for the last 5.5 years, and
The answer is probably
every
yes.
year is yes, 15% from every agency is taken.
Right.
Every line agency.
And again, I'm just trying to understand the process and how this all works. Once they reserve that 15%, what do they do with it? If it was appropriated to you or a certain agency, in this case DOC, if they hold 15% back, do they ultimately give it to you?
Well, my understanding is that it's primarily used to fill needs within other areas within the government. But I think if the agencies need it, at least the agencies I've run, when we did need it and we put in for the request, we did receive it.
Okay. Ms. Bora, I mean, you've been with the department now for a year or two or a couple of years. Is that the experience that you can attest to?
Yes, I know last year when we did need funding before GMH came on, we needed additional funding for medication. We were able to pull it out of our reserves.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I just was wondering about that because somehow I'm not really sure, maybe you can explain it, what the rationale would be to withhold 15%. In other words, if you come before us and you say you need $1 and we give you $1, and then basically the executive branch or the administration then says, well, okay, they gave you $1, but we're going to hold off that 15 cents, even though you've basically made the presentation that dollar is really what you needed. I'm not sure I understand why they don't just give you the $1.
Well, Senator, I think it's a good economic practice. I mean, it's like when you have children and you say, here's your $5 allowance. If you give them all $5, they'll spend the $5. But if you held back 15%, they'll spend what they can within their limits. Now, if they go over, then they'll ask you for the additional. So I think it puts the onus on the directors, the division heads, to ensure that they stay within their budget. And if need arises that they're going over, then the various agencies then request for that 15% reserve. I think it's a good practice, honestly.
No, fair
because
enough.
it puts the fire to the feet of the directors to ensure what they can do to cut costs within their departments.
Okay, and that's fair enough. I mean, like I said, I'm trying to understand that mentality, but because it just seems that even with the efforts that many of the agencies employ in trying to work within, it seems to me that they're always in need of that extra, of the full 100% of their appropriation. In fact, probably even more than 100%.
Right.
And, I guess my concern is that if you're coming here and asking for that $1, right, and of course it's an increase, actually it's more than $1 today because it's going to be 9% more. It's going to be basically $1.09, or let's call it $1.10 that you're asking for, because you're asking for a 9% increase. They withhold it. I'm just wondering if that is kind of like I don't want to call it a ploy, but the strategic position to be able to get that full $1, and then again 15% in this case, so actually you'll be getting 95 cents to the $1 that you really need, and you'll still be able to hold on to that extra. Right. And again, I'm just trying to understand. The government budgets are very complicated.
Well, it's when I was on the other side of the table, I mean, the reality is in the government, right? An agency takes the necessary steps to save money, is not rewarded by giving them more money. It's rewarded by cutting their budget because they're able to save, right? So if an agency came before the legislative body and said, I need $1 million, and then they come back and they say, wow, we saved $200,000, you can be almost guaranteed next year's appropriation will be $800,000, right? So, the system doesn't reward agencies that take the necessary steps to save money. And I think with the implementation of the 15%, in actuality, it now challenges the agency and the agency heads to stay within their budget. If they're unable to, then they come back and request that 15%. I think it's a good practice.
And I don't dispute that. Like I said, I was just trying to understand it, and I'm sure even the public out there is trying to understand. Wait a minute, they keep saying they need, in this case, let's talk about that $1 million, and then they only get $850,000, and they said they're making do, and yet they keep asking for more. It's like, what is this? And again, it's a little bit different from personal finance because this is government, and I understand.
Yeah, government financing is very different. Yeah.
It is very difficult. So I just wanted to kind of ask that for my edification and perhaps many of those who are trying to understand government financing. There is some movement in terms of from the judiciary side in taking a look at new programs to reduce the amount of detainees that will be housed at DOC. And I think they have been in communications with DOC, with your department, on that, on the programs they're looking at. Have you taken that into consideration in preparing this budget? Because if it is implemented, I would imagine that the result will be that 382 detainees who have not been brought to trial or anything else will be a reduced number. And so if that's a reduced number in terms of the number of detainees at DOC, then that will have, I would imagine, a reduced expectation or requirements of cost with it. I guess the question is, if we go down this road, or along with these same lines, if we reduce the number of detainees, has that, bottom line, has that been taken in consideration with this budget? Because now you're asking for an increased budget.
I'm going to pass it to the deputy because she's been working on it.
And that's fair enough.
Thank you, Senator. That's a lot of the programs, like the reentry program and the 3-day count program that we've been a partner to with the judiciary, are in its infancy stage. But when we come back before the legislature in the following year, if we see the significant decrease based on our participation in those programs, then it will be factored into what we will be asking for. But with this budget, it's, again, those programs are in its infancy, so we haven't seen any reduction. But it will be something that we'll definitely consider if it causes us to reduce our expenditures for the next upcoming fiscal year.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Everybody still seems to be concerned about your $3 million, and your good oversight chair commended you on FESPAC. Now I'll ask the nasty question.
Sure.
How much of that overtime has been attributed to FESPAC, and did the FESPAC overtime appropriation get charged for that, or is it being taken out of your operating funds?
The FESPAC overtime comes out to about $25,000. We are absorbing it because we were not included into the overtime legislation.
$25,000
in overtime for FESPAC is what we accumulated. But remember, there was legislation passed by the body for overtime for GPD and fire and DPW. Corrections was not included in that legislation, so we are absorbing that $25,000 overtime within our budget.
And if I as chair FOIA'd the overtime for the months of April and May and June, would I only find $25,000 worth of overtime that we would attribute to?
Would it be just 25, or is it more than 25? Or? Yeah, just for FESPAC. I mean, we can provide you the information.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying. I don't know who your officers are, but you got lots of coverage in the media with all your personnel that was down there doing considerable amount of work. And if I was to look back at their, and I apologize that we didn't include you in that
it's
amount.
Not too late. You can.
I may. I didn't realize that we had neglected. I thought for sure that we had.
Yeah, it was basically DPW, fire, and police. Because trust me, I looked into that as soon as I.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may, so that $25,000 was part of that $3 million overtime.
Yeah.
That we're anticipating.
It's expended already, so. But yeah, it's tracking to about 3, right?
Right. That tracking it to 3. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
And Vice Speaker, again, my apologies. We will provide you the presentation by next week.
All right. Thank you. And we'll take a recess until 2 o'clock to hear Guam Fire Department.